Welcome to Off the Shelf Books on Tour. I'm your host, Veronica Andrews, and my guest today with great excitement is Hank Phillippi Ryan. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, thank you for coming back.
Yes.
Because you were with us before and we had excellent participation and many positive comments.
Well, this is a necessary stop on the book tour.
Well,
I've been on national book tour for the past couple of months, but it wouldn't be fulfilled if I didn't stop and talk to you.
Well, thank you very much. Say No More. Interesting. Set in Boston, which I find, and I find the other readers as well, makes it more real, almost as if it adds depth to the story because you know the areas you're talking about.
I've been a television reporter here for 40 years, and so I know the ins and outs of Boston. You know, it has such a personality.
Yes.
And even if you don't live here, even if you've never been here, you can understand from the book what it's like to be here, how the people behave, the neighborhoods, the history, the streets, the secret areas that no one knows about, the government and the colleges and the administration and the police and the journalists. I know it all too well.
Yes, yeah, well, that comes through. It's very, very real. When you sit, if you can find a quiet place without something ringing or dinging, you literally can get lost in the story because you make it so very real.
Well, you know, I've wired myself with hidden cameras. I've confronted corrupt politicians. I've gone undercover and in disguise. So for the people say to me, do you do a lot of research for your mystery novels?
Yes.
And I say, I've been doing research for 40 years. You know,
But you also have
this.
to empty your pockets at night and find this little scrap of paper with an idea and this. You know, does it haunt you in elevators and when you drive down the street?
Well, I'm a storyteller. That's what the whole key of this whole thing is. You know, so for all these years, I've been telling news stories every day. I've just never been able to make stuff up. So a wonderful story has the essence of reality, exactly as you said, and you twist and polish and change and inject it with adrenaline. You know, a thriller like Say No More is just like real life. I think Publishers Weekly called it full of realistic danger. So it's something that could really happen to a real reporter in a real city like Boston. And you pack all that excitement in the 400 pages of the book so that people are reading it sort of nonstop. I mean, I imagine people missing their stop on the subway because they're just so deeply into the entertainment.
And you always pick a topic that's very real. And with all of our educational institutions and private schools in this area, the situation that's the core is very real.
Well, it's fascinating because the reviews have been astonishing with words like superb and standout and brilliant, and that's so nice to hear after all, that time that you spend by yourself in your study, typing. But they all say rip from the headlines. And that is so interesting because you know how long it takes for a book to be published, 1.5 years or 2. So if I ripped something from the headlines, it would be old by the time the book came out. But that's the thing that's so fascinating about Say No More. Campus sexual assault was in the headlines, and sexual assault was in the headlines 2 years ago when I started writing this book, but even more in the headlines now. And that's what makes it so compelling. That's what makes it so disturbing. That's what makes it so necessary for people to read. I mean, my job is to entertain you. You know, I'm writing a fast-paced thriller set in Boston with a police detective and with a journalist. But Publishers Weekly also called it unflinching. And I'm really proud of that because if I can write an entertaining novel that you can't put down, great. If I can sneak in there a new perspective, a new worldview, if I can educate you or enlighten you or give you a different perspective on how someone might feel or think that you would never, someone whose head you'd never be in, then I've written a book that's also important. So I like to think of this book as unflinching. I mean, there's no graphic violence.
No.
There's no graphic sex.
No heavy breathing. No swear words.
Right.
I appreciate that.
Thank you. And yes, exactly. The language is appropriate.
Oh.
So imagine me writing about with one of the story, just one of the three story threads being campus sexual assault, without any of that, but still being powerful. So that was my goal, and that was my challenge in this book. And it just got named a Library Journal Best Thriller of the Year.
That was my next question. Do you have a room where all the awards fit?
Oh, that's so nice of you. I do have 33 Emmys for investigative reporting.
Doesn't everybody?
Yes, yes. Well, I've been around a long time. That's the thing. It happens. I'm old, and so this is what happens. I have to tell you that they all the Emmys and my Agatha Awards, 5 Agathas, are in my study on a bookshelf with books. And some days, some writing days are fabulous, and you're full of this muse of writing a great story. And some writing days, I have to say, are not the best. I mean, you just think, I'll never have another good idea in my life, and whose idea was it to write this book? And I don't have any idea. And on those days, I can admit to you that on those days, I look at the Emmys and I look at the Agathas, and I think, at one point it worked. And in every task I've ever done, there's always a point where you think, I don't know how to do this. And then the next point is, oh, I have a good idea. So I've learned to embrace the panic, knowing that the answer will come next. And those awards, for every one of which I'm grateful, incredibly grateful, reminds me that I can do it. It sounds sort of silly.
You do it very well.
Thank you.
When you were a little girl, what did you want to be when you grow up? A news reporter, a television personality, or a writer?
Well, for a while I wanted to be a cowboy. I mean, that was
the only
I wanted to be a cowboy, and then I wanted to be a flight attendant because I thought that would be a cool job. And then I wanted to be a disc jockey, and then I wanted to be a lawyer, and then I wanted to be a geneticist. But really, when I grew up in really rural Indiana, so rural that you couldn't see another house from our house, and my sister and I used to ride our ponies to the library and get books, and fill up the saddlebags with books, and then we'd read up in the hayloft of the barn behind our house.
That's a story in itself.
And that's where I fell in love with storytelling, though. That's where I read Nancy Drew and Hercule Poirot and Sherlock Holmes. I mean, I binged the Sherlock Holmes stories. And I knew that in answer to your question finally, that I wanted to be a mystery writer or a detective. And so it's so fascinating and sweet, really, now, how after all these years, I've turned out to be a mystery writer
and a good detective.
And a detective, because an investigative reporter is everything a detective is. So it's really funny how those childhood dreams can come true. Tess Gerritsen always talks about this, about how so many of her writer friends sort of self-selected when they were that age, when they were 7 or 8, and knew they wanted to be authors, even though they didn't become authors instantly. That was always on their radar. That was always one of their dreams.
And hold on to a young man from Danvers who went to college to be a writer, and they said, forget it. And he was a chemist for 20 years, and then he retired, and he sat down and wrote a children's book, Worldwide Acceptance, Contracts, the world. So believing in yourself and your ability.
Well, believing in yourself and your ability, I think you're so right, that's so key. And sort of knowing that there's a time for everything, that being open to the moment when the universe offers you the possibility of succeeding at something new. I remember when I got the idea for my first book. I was 55 years old, so that's 12 years ago. And I knew it was a good idea for a mystery. I knew it was. And I came home and I said to my husband, I've got the idea for the book that I wanted to write for the past 50 years. And Jonathan says, I said, I'm going to write a book. And Jonathan says, great, sweetheart. Do you know how to write a book? And I remember so clearly, I said, how hard can it be? I've read a million of these. But I had this sort of passion from so many years ago to sit down and write a good story. And I had the experience from being a television reporter for all those years of knowing how to tell a story with a beginning, middle, and an end, a problem that needs to be solved with characters who you care about, and then in the end, to get some justice and to change the world a little bit. So that's what I try to do as an investigative reporter, and it's also what I do in my thrillers. I want you not to be able to put the book down.
But in your reporting and in your life up to age 50, which you never stop learning and you're always taking notes. In investigating, you were a bit of a detective, so you remembered that nuance and that nuance. In the law that you cite in the book, and how quizzical that can be, and how, what a very fine line there is between circumstance and crime. Those are things that you picked up along the way, being a reporter, ingesting it all and keeping it on the back burner for later. So it's research, but it's life.
Exactly. That is so well put. Because you never know what interesting fact or interesting complication or interesting conflict you're going to come up with in real life. And you tuck that away. And when the characters in my book, when Jane Ryland, the investigative reporter, and Jake Brogan, the Boston police detective, come up against these situations, do you really have to report if you see a crime? What is the power of silence? What if you decide to see something and not say anything
or do something
about it, or not do something about it? What is your responsibility? What is your culpability morally and legally, and how sometimes those aren't the same thing? Yeah. And how do we as human beings deal with that? How does a police officer deal with that? How does a reporter deal with that? And how does a compassionate human being deal with that?
In the conflict of the two of them, there are things that she can't tell him. There's things that he can't tell her. And if he knew that she knew, it's like a potholder that the grandchildren make with those loops. You lube this one in, and then you come down this way with another one. It's woven very well. You're a weaver, and not just a storyteller.
Oh my goodness, you bring tears to my eyes.
Oh, I didn't mean to do that.
Well, I love it, and I appreciate your understanding of the sort of dramatic irony of the different points of view of the book, because the cool part is Jane Ryland, the reporter, knows what Jane knows and sees the world through her eyes, and so do you. And Jake Brogan, the cop, sees the world through his eyes, and he knows what he knows. Tosca, the victim of campus sexual assault, knows what she knows and sees the world through her eyes. But the reader knows all of those. And so the reader can put together, the reader knows more than the characters know. And so I allow the reader to put the story together, the little Rubik's Cube puzzle pieces.
Taking the edge of the potholder and weaving it so the finished product is there. The topic of sexual violence on campus, yes, unfortunately, it's always there. And we all kind of knew what went on in the background, but you put it in writing.
Thank you.
And that's true. And those who haven't been brave enough to step forward and say, not on your life, fella, I would hope that they could get some courage and not let it happen to them, because they're not alone.
Well, it's beautifully said, and I think my goal in this book is to be enlightening and empowering. And anyone who has any students, whether they're boys or girls in college, needs to read this book and give it to your children. And give it to their friends. And let me not forget that this is entertaining. It's a murder mystery, it's a thriller. But the undercurrent in this book is this incredibly important problem of campus sexual assault. A person asked me at an event the other day, said to me, I'm so glad my daughter read your book, I'm going to send her to defensive training. And I said, great, but also teach her confidence and to be aware of her surroundings. You know, 1 out of 5 young women in college is sexually assaulted. I mean, that's ridiculously crazy, terrifying. And 150 colleges and universities are under federal investigation right now for covering up campus sexual assault. 10% of the campus, 90% of the campus sexual assaults happen in the first week of college.
Well, that's when they're most vulnerable, away from home. Exactly. They're not walking
and you can imagine
tall.
it. And so that's what I wanted to make sure that the readers knew in this book, through the eyes of Tosca, a senior in college who calls herself Tosca. She's an opera student, an A+ opera student, who's been assaulted. She's so traumatized that she spends most of her senior year in her apartment in Kenmore Square.
And that's what the bad guys want.
Yeah.
That's what the bullies, and they are bullies, want to happen to the victims. They want to make them feel so bad that they never speak out loud or speak again.
And that's why the title is Say No More, because sexual assault thrives on silence, it thrives on humiliation, it thrives on embarrassment, it thrives on fear, it thrives on silence, it thrives on people saying no more. Again, that's just one of the topics in the book. The other one, the real impetus of where the book came from was from a real experience that I had witnessing a hit-and-run accident.
Isn't that frightening?
It was so terrifying. And so I saw a hit-and-run accident. I saw the man who crashed into the delivery van in front of him. I cataloged what he looked like, and then he drove away. And I wrote down his license number in the dust on the dashboard of our car, just like Jane does in the book. And when the police came, they said to me, "Did you see anything?" And I said, "Yes, I saw that. I saw the whole accident. I saw the driver, and I'll be happy to come talk to you about it if you need me to." I never thought they would. And a couple of months later, I got a call from the district attorney's office saying, "We've charged someone in the hit and run. Will you come to court and point him out?" And I thought, no, I'm a reporter and I'm a mystery author, so I can create any scary scenarios.
But being the center?
Well, it's interesting because I thought, what if he knows who I am? If he doesn't, he's certainly going to know when I go into court and raise my right hand and say my name. And he knows where I work, and he knows when I'm going to be there. And he's a bad guy. And what if this is a dangerous thing? And I thought, I'm not sure I want to say any more about this. And then I thought, aha, my book, my book, my book. So Jane Ryland witnesses a hit and run. I did. When the police asked me to testify, I did. And it was scary. But I also thought, this is a great book, Say No More. A person who witnesses a hit and run, who, when she divulges who the driver was, it turns out to be dangerous. A victim of campus sexual assault, who's sort of drawn into a scheme to keep other victims like her quiet. And a person who lives around Kenmore Square, in Boston, who may have witnessed a murder, but who doesn't want to say any more to the police. And what if silence is the only thing that's keeping those three women alive?
Yep.
And that's the essence of Say No More.
But you have to be a little brave. I had a bakery truck fly past the school bus one morning with the lights on. And I got the phone number. And I called and I asked if there were lemon meringue pies in the truck that would have fallen if he stopped.
Oh, my goodness.
And unfortunately for that driver, it was his mother that I was talking to. Now, was he in more trouble than the guy with the hit and run?
That's interesting. That's a great story. That's a great story. I'm not sure if the pie guy would have been the most compelling beginning of the story, but you never know.
Well, but she never passed another school bus.
But it turned out that, what she witnesses was much more than a hit and run accident. Yeah. She just didn't know it.
But you don't.
Right.
As you go through life, and so much more awareness now, if it looks different, say something. If you see it, report it. You and I didn't grow up in that world, but you have to as you come and go. And that's a where in the pages of the book. You take the world as I knew it when I was young and roaming around Boston. I lived at the Franklin Square house. And now, where Dudley Street and Dudley is open, restaurants and everything, but the change is gradual. It's not a slap in your head techno wizardry. They both have different phones. One that you dare not call him.
That's true. That's true. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, and my mother would say to me, "Be in the world, be aware, keep your eyes open." And I learned that from her, and it has served me so well as a reporter and also so well as a mystery author. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that I learned from her, just as we were talking about, is I would ask my mother a question, and she would say, "Go and find out. Why don't you go and find out for yourself? Why don't you ask?" And she gave me the courage and the power to do research, to ask questions, to not be afraid, to get to the bottom of things. And that's such a wonderful legacy.
I wonder if our mothers knew one another. My mother taught me, and I've said this a million times, ask the question and then question the answer.
Oh, I love that.
And that is astounding because people don't expect it. they'll give you the plot answer and placate you and wish you'd go away. You ask a second question and they almost wipe out. I'm authority. You're not supposed to ask me why or how come.
Well, that's the new book I'm working on. I haven't talked to anybody about this but you, which is sort of scary. But it's about why we believe what we believe. And in the news, how do we know what's true? And how the filter of a reporter or journalist's mind may twist what is reality.
To make you believe what they want you to believe.
It. And why does that happen? And how does that happen? And what if a journalist finds out that she's wrong? What happens next, and what's our responsibility?
Oh, I will look forward to that one. I wonder if these kids that walk through the day like this all the way, they didn't listen to their mothers when their mothers told them to be aware, to watch, to ask, to look and listen. I see them walking into sandwich boards on the sidewalk.
That has happened. I agree that has happened. But the world I create in Say No More is a realistic Boston, where there are people who are on their phones, where there are people who are nefarious, where there are people with agendas that are hidden. And that's why Jane, the investigative reporter, has to do what she does and go undercover to try to figure out what's really happening at this university, and then what will happen at the end of the story.
Now, you did a raffle or something in which 2 people got mentioned in the book, which is delightful. Do you ever have people that are afraid you're gonna mention them in a book, or they swear that you took their personality for a character?
You know, it's interesting because I try to explain. You know, the only person who's ever been in any of my books who actually was portrayed, and I told her that she wasn't, but that was not true, was my mother. She knew that she was one of my character's mothers, and she called me and she said, you know, you put me in your book, and I swore that I didn't, but I did.
To your mother.
Well, I told her later that it was true, and it was a a wonderful character. No, I got in a lot of trouble. It was a wonderful character, but my books, even though they're ripped from my own headlines, are not ripped from the actual people who I know. So the administrators of the school in Kenmore Square in Boston, in Say No More, those aren't any people that are anywhere near to being anything real. Jane's a little bit me, a little bit, but I'm 30 years older than Jane is. So she is 33 in 2016. I was 33, however long ago that was. It's a different time. So I get to portray a 33-year-old, a contemporary 33-year-old, which is very different from how it was when I was 33. So, but the characters in the book are not based on any people. And I keep saying to people, they're fiction. It's fiction. It's fiction. Fiction is a thing that Sue Grafton sort of calls the magic, because it isn't taking real life and changing the name of it or putting in a different place or calling it something different. It is creating out of nothing but your own imagination and your own creativity and your own brain somehow. It is creating a completely new world that's based on truth. I mean, it is true. It's just as true for it as real life is. But to ring as reality and to draw you into the story, fiction has to be just as true for itself as real life is.
But some people who never had their imagination ignited really don't know what you're talking about. Could you read for us a passage that would wet the whistle of our readers?
Sure.
Thank you. We'll be right back.
So as I said, this book just got named Library Journal Best Thriller of the Year. I'm thrilled about it. The main character is Jane Ryland, an investigative reporter, and as the story opens, she's witnessed a hit-and-run accident, and she's called to court to identify the driver, and this is what happens. Was she ready? Jane tried not to laugh out loud at the judge's question. This was the world's most horrible idea. Jane, sitting in open court, faced with 6 dozen spectators, expected to point out the driver in a hit-and-run accident. Ready? Yeah, she was ready. Ready to bolt straight out of that big double door, uniformed guards or no, and head for the hills. Yes, Your Honor, Jane said. I'm ready. Mr. McCusker? Judge Scapicchio pointed a scarlet fingernail at the assistant DA. Jane watched McCusker stand slowly and smile at her, the practical expression of a reassurance he must have used before on countless nervous or reluctant unfortunates in her position. Jane heard a low rumble from the audience as a few dozen people murmured what they probably thought was softly to a few dozen others. "Spectators, you will remain silent during the hearing," the judge said. "Any outbursts, any discussions or reaction, and I'll have you removed from my courtroom and held in contempt. Am I clear?" Silence. "Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Miss Ryland." McCusker turned some pages in his loose-leaf binder. Jane waited, her world on pause, wondering how she must look to the spectators, each and every one of whom was staring at her. Well, all but one, and he was looking at the judge. She felt herself gulp and tried to pretend she wasn't nervous, because there was no reason to be nervous, except there was.
Oh, you're good at that.
Isn't it fun? It's fun to write,
Well,
too.
when you put the period at the end of the sentence, do you go, yes?
May I confess to you
Yes, please do.
that when I figured out the end of Say No More,
And that's an interesting end. I can truly say I've never seen a book, a story end that way. It's interesting, unique, invigorating. Keep on going. I'll keep on going.
do you love this? I don't use an outline, so I don't know what's going to happen next. So when people say, "Wow, the ending of Say No More surprised me," I say, "Didn't it? Wasn't that a surprise?"
Well, it's Say
Talk
No
about
More.
a surprise ending. I surprised myself. But when I figured out the ending of Say No More, I was by myself in my study, and I stood up and applauded.
Good for you.
I got this. I got this.
But that's what works. And thank you for coming and being with us and being who you are. You believe in yourself. You're proud of yourself. You work very hard, and you're proud of your accomplishments, and you should be.
Well, thank you. I'm very happy, and I'm very grateful, and I feel very lucky to be doing what I'm doing.
But when you do it, you gift it to others. And that's the important thing. I think you were a woman in the industry long before anybody dared come out from behind the desk. Thank you, thank you, thank you for coming back to play with us.
My complete pleasure.
We certainly enjoyed it, and boy, will I look forward to the next one.
Thank you.
Yes.
I will too.
That's it for Off the Shelf Books on Tour. Our guest has been Hank Phillippi Ryan in the very good book that is a great Christmas present, Say No More. Bye. I got no more to say.